Coming up this Saturday, WWE is going to be holding its latest event in Saudi Arabia. It's part of a 10-year agreement that the company has with the Saudi Arabian government. And here to speak with us about Saudi Arabia's growing influence in sport and abroad, he is the co-author of Blood and Money, Bradley Hope, joining us now. Bradley, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate the time.
My pleasure.
Let's start off with you were based in the Middle East for a good portion of your career, and in your reporting and then the release of your book in 2020, can you just tell me a bit about, in your own eyes, the growing influence that you have seen just within Saudi Arabia, just in the 4 years since your book has come out, and where we are at present, where, especially in sport and the perspective we're coming at it from, it just seems it is enormous in terms of the impact it's having in professional wrestling, boxing, F1, and so many other sports now.
Yeah, I think when I was living in the region back in the sort of 2008 till 2016 period, sorry, that's not quite 2008 to 2013 period. Saudi Arabia was this kind of quiet place. There was not a lot going on. It was, a kind of a large country with a lot of money and oil, but it just was very quiet. Even when you went there on a conference or something, it would just not be a very vibrant place. And ever since MBS rose to power with his father, that country has become, globally recognized on every possible level in geopolitics, in investing. They're one of the most active investors in the world. And then more recently, just exploding in the world of entertainment and sports. And it just shows that this new crown prince, who's in reality, he's like the acting king of Saudi Arabia. He is just has so much energy and so much focus on bringing the country into the sort of 21st century and changing its reputation from the sleepy conservative country that people have kind of heard of, but maybe not for good things. And that's what's driving this. It's a country that's increasingly run by young people as well. So a lot of it's an absolute monarchy. So it's theoretically just one man in power, but in reality, there's still a kind of politics. He still has a mandate from the people of the country, and his mandate since day one has really been about the young population, because Saudi Arabia has had an explosion of youth over the last 50 years. It went from a pretty small place to a pretty big place. And those youth population that are so core to his mandate are part of what's driving this interest in sports. That's what the young Saudis want, and so that's what he's bringing them.
And I was wondering, Bradley, if you could tell us about the relationship between MBS and Turki Al-Sheikh, who is somebody that wrestling fans see every now and then, and MMA fans and boxing fans as well, as somebody he's the chairman of the General Entertainment Authority. He's done sort of these photo ops with wrestling personalities around these WWE events. And so just, if you could tell us like what his story is and how he came to be the chairman of and the person who's overseeing all these entertainment and sports events.
Yeah, well, he's a fascinating character. He and another guy called Prince Badr are two people that were very close to MBS before he rose to power. So they have this. They knew him when he was just a relatively unknown prince. And so they have that deep trust and relationship based on the fact that they kind of came up together. They grew up together to some extent. And so Turkey had different jobs in the government. He's not a member of the royal family, unlike Prince Badr, but he had different jobs in the Ministry of Interior, which is essentially the police of Saudi Arabia. And he doesn't have really qualifications that would have suggested he would have this role, other than the fact that he had this really close relationship with MBS, part of the inner royal court, so to speak. And he has he's a very entertaining guy. He's kind of the life of the party, and he's always been that way. He's kind of the person that keeping everyone in this small, powerful entourage laughing for years. And so just naturally, as MBS took power, he was given a kind of job, and it was unclear if he was going to keep that job, but he has been quite successful at bringing big sports stars to Saudi Arabia, throwing some of Saudi Arabia's most kind of elaborate events. They have all these things called seasons. So there's Riyadh season, Jeddah season. It's like these huge activity events for the Saudi population, and he's also kind of the master of ceremonies for some of these big sporting events. And he's quite a character too. There was a video that was going around for a few years ago where he was playing FIFA, the video game, and he lost, and he destroyed the screen, the TV screen, and it was just like he just like walked away like a giant screen. He just like smashed it and left. So I think he's kind of relatable in a way to a part of the population because he's kind of the the wild character, the life of the party, and I think that's what actually makes him a great relationship manager for these celebrities. They also enjoy spending time with him, and of course, the guy has an enormous amount of money to spend and entertain with, and enjoy with everybody.
So, I mean, the term that is so frequently utilized, and I think people have different definitions for it, of sports washing. And I think to some people, they look at, their Saudi Arabia's investment in sports and bringing a lot of these major entertainment and sports vehicles to the country with the idea that this is kind of providing a sheen for a lot of the human rights issues and other elements of the country. In 2024, is that still a very fair assessment? Have you observed advancements in Saudi Arabia under MBS's reign, or is that sort of like what the strategy is at play here, that there are still a lot of repressive aspects of the culture, but this is also very much fulfilling a lot of your younger audience, and they're getting all of these different sporting and live entertainment events that it does kind of provide for a bit of a, distraction from other realities?
Yeah, I think so. I never liked the term sports washing because I know that this is such a painful term in Saudi Arabia to hear because it has nothing to do with the way that they think about it. What they're thinking about is a few different things, right? They're trying to make their own population happy, make Saudi Arabia a place to stay, not to leave all the time. Every time you want to enjoy something, you don't want your population leaving the country to go next door to Dubai or somewhere else,
right?
Or to Europe or to America. So that's an element of it. The other element is that part of this economic transformation of Saudi Arabia, tourism actually plays an important role. So MBS genuinely wants Saudi Arabia to be a tourist destination, and that means making it entertaining. So they're building hotels, they're building event spaces. Of course, you want to have reasons to attend, Formula One races and boxing matches and things like that, so the country is transforming rapidly. It's so rapid that if you go visit Saudi Arabia 1 month and you come back again 6 months later, it feels different already, so it's undergoing a huge transformation. Now, of course, MBS has always been very concerned with the image of Saudi Arabia as a conservative, repressive, negative place, and has been working very hard to change that. And so part of changing that is to prove it's not like what it used to be. So yeah, you can call that like a sort of a PR event to prove that Saudi Arabia is different. But in Saudi Arabia, there's nobody there being like, let's open up the cash reserves for sports washing. They're thinking, we love sports. Our population loves sports. Tourists love sports. So I think it's a little bit unfair to say that it's really just for this purpose, and it really comes from the point of view of a kind of critical Western audience to think that that's the reason they're doing this kind of stuff, and that's just not how it works over there or anywhere, to be honest.
Yeah. So our reporting has shown, it's basically been confirmed in a number of ways by WE's reporting, that Saudi Arabia, the government, is paying about $50 million for each event. They do 2 of these events a year, so it's about $100 million a year. There was discussion from TKO's president, Mark Shapiro, just the other day that they're looking to expand the deal, which is currently, it's a 10-year deal that I believe would go to about 2028. But it's, to put that in some perspective for the audience, $50 million is like twice as much money as any wrestling event has ever drawn on a single day in ticket sales. So it's a fee way above what's normal for a WWE event. So it's raised a criticism that it looks like they're overpaying for something, and they're doing public relations, not only helping Saudi Arabia with the Vision 2030 and moving Saudi Arabia into different forms of economics, but it's also presenting to Western viewers who are watching WWE throughout the world on Peacock in the United States, this, this event where, hey, look, this is an event in Saudi Arabia and everything looks fun and entertaining and fine here, and then it looks normal. Do you feel like that's a legitimate criticism, or is that unfair?
No, I think that's the startup cost of convincing new sports, new events to come to Saudi Arabia. It's not a natural place to go. Like, no one's going to go there and do it at a discount. The startup cost of really getting into this kind of thing is you have to pay more. I think a good example is, when Netflix in the early years, when they were doing deals with like celebrities and writers and stuff, they were paying them crazy money. They would say, we're paying a writer like $100 million or something crazy like that. And nowadays, Netflix doesn't do those deals anymore. But in the beginning, they had to. They had to do big deals with high profit margins to convince people to work exclusively with them. So I think Saudi Arabia, what we'll see is all of the first deals, the first years of these deals will be very hefty and very profitable. But over time, they will actually start to get more regular and more normal. So I think, again, it's not like they're purposefully overpaying. This is the kind of startup cost. Like, there's never been WWE in Saudi Arabia before. How do we convince them to come? Despite other reasons, the lack of infrastructure to some extent, or even maybe some of the critics that are out there saying, so they're not going to have WWE come and do. WWE is not going to want to come and do something that is at cost. They're going to want to have a margin to set up a new, essentially a franchise in this country.
In your book, you also, in speaking about like the younger population, I think you cited like 60% of the population under the age of 30, at least at the time of your reporting with the book. And one thing that really comes very clear, like MBS is someone that is still under the age of 40. He has risen up in his 30s, and someone that I certainly took from reading is really understood the power of social media, and in particular Twitter, how that is very engaging for that younger population. And it seems as though MBS both understands the usefulness of something like social media, but also the other side of it is that seems very reticent to be criticized on that platform, where we have seen some of these enormous punishments up to and including death when it comes to criticism on the platform. I just want some of your thought on his kind of thinking towards social media as a tool in a lot of his kind of efforts.
Yeah, I think it goes to the heart of the way that Saudi exists today. It is a bit of a mirage to look at all these things happening, women walking around with their heads uncovered. These are things that weren't happening before. Equality in the workplace, more rights to intermingle, having music playing. These are all new developments in Saudi Arabia. But at the same time, while the social side has made progress, the political side is almost gone backwards. And it comes to this core concept in Saudi Arabia, which is they are becoming more socially liberal, but they believe in retaining the absolute monarchy. And in absolute monarchy, you can't have people in the streets protesting. This is their thinking. They have to come and sort of ask the king. They have to ask the crown prince, saying, we want this new right. Will you give it to us? It's not we have the right and you have to recognize it. It's we want the right. Will you give it to us? And so this is very alien for us as Americans to imagine a scenario like that. But that is the way that Saudi Arabia is set up. And so everyone has these tools, social media, and they can increasingly talk about things and push the boundaries. But what they can't push the boundaries on is the political side. They will. And this is kind of true across the whole Arabian Gulf, with the UAE and Saudi and Qatar, is they will not accept criticism of the royal family. And they have their reasons, which is they think that if those countries were to open up to democracy, you would get the wrong kind of people in charge. You'd get people that could take it on dangerous pathways. They don't really believe in democracy for their countries. And so that's why it's kind of confusing and tricky, because it seems normal. It seems like it's increasingly westernized, but in reality, it is still an absolute monarchy where these are not rights that are given to people. You can't protest. You can't criticize the ruler. And in Saudi, the only thing you're allowed to do is criticize like if the water authority is failing to provide water to you, you can criticize that, but then you wouldn't say this is the crown prince's fault. His government is doing a bad job. You would just say the guy in charge of the water isn't doing a bad job, and so it is tricky. And I think a lot of young Saudis have gotten themselves in trouble, especially in the early days of MBS's rise, thinking that the social liberalization also meant they could be more politically open and more politically ambitious. And they really suffered huge consequences. I think in general, this is not the kind of place where you're getting executed for Twitter activity. It's much more like there are some certain examples where people have gone to prison for longer periods of time. There's a lot of people in prison in Saudi Arabia. It's unclear what is the kind of judicial process for why they're still in prison. You know, there's a famous case of a guy who criticized the oil company having a public offering, an internet, an IPO, and that guy hasn't been heard of. You know, he's been. It seems I'm not sure if he's out or not, but he did get in trouble for a long time, at least. Maybe still in trouble just for criticizing that. So, you know, that's kind of the situation in Saudi Arabia.
And what has made WWE and Saudi Arabia's relationship really interesting and a big story for us to cover is this is a deal that started in 2018, and they did one event in April of 2018, and then they did their second event in November of 2018, which was exactly 1 month after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, which of course was a huge international story. So I think something that people are wondering about is, we hear these messages about how MBS is a progressive ruler and things are changing. How much has human rights improved, if at all, since 2018 or so?
Yeah, I think, well, in Saudi
and to what
Arabia,
degree, and to what degree, if any, do these sports and entertainment events like WWE contribute to any change that's happening?
Yeah, I think, the in Saudi Arabia, in the leadership, the high echelons of leadership, there's no discussion there of the Khashoggi killing as being an attack on journalism, right? That's how we see it in the rest of the world, because he was also a journalist, among other things, and he was writing these critical pieces. And so we made a sort of external linkage between, oh, he wrote something negative, therefore he was killed. But in Saudi Arabia, he's seen more as kind of like a traitor, because he was closely working for the royal family for his whole career, not really as like a journalist in the traditional sense. And then he started doing these things that were against the royal family. And so and he was connected to other people, and they had their own imagination about why this was the case. So anyway, that's an important thing to note, because they don't see things the way that we portray them or we see them from our point of view, So I think that's an important initial thought, because they don't think that they have a problem with attacking people for free speech. But on the other hand, they're very concerned about their reputation. They don't want to be seen as a country that is murderous, that doesn't believe in journalism and all these things that are internationally accepted as good things. So anything that they can do to show that this is a normal place where normal things happen is useful to them. I just don't think it's the primary reason why they're doing it. And the fact that there was something that came right after the Jamal Khashoggi thing, it shows that ultimately commerce and business is less judgmental than sort of international politics. I remember that there was this conference that they have every year in Saudi Arabia that ever since MBS rose to power, called the FII, the Future Investment Initiative. And everybody in the world would come for this conference. And then after Khashoggi, no one showed up for 1 year. Then the second year, they all came back.
Right.
So business people have a short memory for this kind of thing, and they are eager for things to return to normal. And I think the other reason people want things to return to normal is they realize that MBS wasn't going anywhere. There was a lot of discussion after the Khashoggi killing that maybe the royal family would remove him and somebody else would take charge. And there was this idea that his days could be numbered. He has proven that to be completely not the case. He is really completely in control of the country. Nobody else could ever take power away from him. And add to that the huge amounts of money flowing into Saudi Arabia because of the price of oil in the last 5 years. It has made him into one of the most important, if not the most important investor in the world. Every banker, every new startup, from OpenAI, anybody, they will show up in Saudi Arabia looking for an investment, and because of that, the judgmental kind of quality has completely fallen away, including the U.S. government. Joe Biden, when he came into power, said he wasn't going to meet with MBS because he wasn't on the same level as him. He would only meet the king, and Joe Biden must regret that, because a few years down the line, he realized the king wasn't going to take any calls from him, and because the crown prince was in charge. And so Joe Biden had to go to Saudi Arabia, do the fist bump. Nowadays, they're desperate for Saudi Arabia to do what the U.S. asks. The position of power kind of changed. Like, they made a bad bet that they could sort of do that, and it was kind of a political move. But yeah, that's how I see it.
So, like, for the average WWE fan and there are some fans like this who feel like, I don't know if I want to watch this WWE event in Saudi Arabia. I don't know if I feel right about it. Have human rights improved at all since 2018 or so?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in the sense that the last thing Saudi Arabia would ever try to have happen is a series of events like this. The cost of the Khashoggi killing is so expensive, if you think about it, of the amount of goodwill and good PR that was exterminated by that event, that they're just so incentivized to not allow that kind of reputation to persist. So I think I think freedoms in Saudi Arabia are generally increasing, but the political side is still very restricted. But as tourists, as visitors, I don't think there would be a huge problem. That you might find the same exact problem in any of the countries in the Gulf. If you go to Abu Dhabi and you're starting to mouth off about the guy in charge, somebody might pull you aside and say that's not appropriate here. They're not going to arrest you, but you could get yourself evicted or kicked out of the country or something like that. I think they wouldn't physically harass them or try to keep them there, even try to arrest them or something. But now, if you're a Saudi citizen, that's where your risks are very high. If you're a Saudi person and you criticize the crown prince, it's very different.
Khashoggi was a Saudi citizen.
Yes, exactly. And so Saudi people and Emirati people and Qatari people and Kuwaiti people, they have to be careful what they say about their rulers, because they're not protected by sort of international outrage the same way that visitors are,
We'll wrap up in just a minute, Bradley. You've been very generous with your time. I was curious, just following up on your last answer, is in the lead up to the release of your book in 2020, what you expected the reaction to be within Saudi Arabia to a book like that, and was the reaction to your expectation? Like, how would like a deep look into the rise of MBS be viewed within the country from someone outside of Saudi Arabia?
I think, even though we didn't hold back, we were we dove deep, and we looked for, we put everything we could into the book that we could confirm. I think in Saudi Arabia, there's some respect that we didn't do anything unfair. We sought comment on every single point. We were guided by many people in Saudi Arabia. We visited Saudi Arabia for the reporting of this book, if you can believe it. We were just very honest about what we were trying to do, why we were trying to do it. And so I think as a result, there's no sense of mean-spiritedness from us in writing this book. And so it's kind of probably grudgingly accepted. You won't find the book, as far as I'm aware, sold in the Middle East anywhere. Mm-hmm. But a lot of Saudis were buying it here in London, and the booksellers told me they would leave the cover behind, but they would take the book, because the cover is kind of aggressive, with the red and white. So yeah, the reaction was not like scary. I think there was, it was a little bit quiet on the Middle East side.
Well, we want to thank you very much. It's been out for a few years, but Brandon and I both, we would recommend Blood and Oil, that is out there right now, along with your co-author, Justin Sheck. And you can follow Bradley on X at Bradley Hope. And anything else you want to mention, Bradley, before we say goodbye, that you're in the midst of working on?
Oh, no, I've since left the Wall Street Journal, and I have a company now called Project Brazen. We make a lot of podcasts, so come check it out.
Excellent stuff. Well, thank you so much, Bradley. This has been great insight on your behalf, and we appreciate you jumping on with us.
Thanks, Bradley.
Nice to meet you guys.